Before we get started, I am the director of the Freeman Spogli Institute. We are a nonpartisan, interdisciplinary think tank here on campus. We work on all sorts of things, and we have an all-star panel for you to talk about the range of things that we study at FSI about global threats today. But I want to tell you, if this is a good experience for you, and I want you to do two things. One, I want you to buy my book. And you can pre-order it on your phone now or get it at the bookstore. I thought it was going to be here, but it's not. I misspoke yesterday at my talk, but it is available at the bookstore. But more seriously, I want you to sign up for our newsletter and various things in the back, because your education at Stanford shouldn't have ended when you left here, and then you just like revive it every 3 days, for 3 days every 5 or 10 years. We now, because of technology, have a way to keep you engaged with what we do in a weekly basis. And you can come to our webinars, you can get our mailing, and so sign up in the back if you like what you hear today. Okay, that's my advertisement. And now let's get on. We do have a fantastic panel. You have their bios, so we're not gonna go through them in detail. We all wear multiple hats, including me, but we are all fellows at the Freeman Spogli Institute. And we're going to cover climate change, AI competition, nuclear weapons in the Middle East, global democracy, Russia and the Ukraine war, all in 60 minutes. And if you remember when you were here at Stanford, professors, we like 70 minutes to get to a point. My lecture yesterday, I timed it, it was 42 minutes, so thanks for coming if you came to talk about that. But we're going to try something different. We're going to try to be punchy. And I'm going to ask 3 questions down the row, and then we're going to leave enough time that you can ask anything that you want of any of the panelists, including me. That's our goal anyway. All right, in order, very quickly. First, Marshall Burke, also class of 2022, so another Stanford alum. We should have planned for that.
Class of 02.
Whoa, class of 02, I'm sorry. My son is the class of 2022, but he looks like he could be 2022, right? He's the deputy director of our Center on Food Security and the Environment. He's also a professor at the new Doerr School for Sustainability, senior fellow at FSI, but also at the Woods Institute and the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research. Colin Call is the Stephen C. Haase senior fellow at FSI at our Center for International Security and Cooperation. From 2021 to 23, he served as the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy at the U.S. Department of State in the Biden administration, and he actually served in multiple different jobs, including we served together in the Obama administration for a while. Ori Rabinowitz, yeah, right, please. Ori Rabinowitz is here. She's a visiting fellow from in our Israeli Studies program at FSI, at CSAC as well, an associate professor at the International Relations Department of Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Larry Diamond, class of 73, 78, and 80, that's what my notes say here, is the Mosbacher Senior Fellow of Global Democracy at FSI at the Center for Democracy, Development, and Rule of Law at FSI. He's also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and professor by courtesy in sociology and political science. Welcome, Larry. And Steve Pfeiffer, Steve to me, ambassador to you, is class of 1976. He's also at CSAC, also affiliated with the Europe Center, both at FSI, and from 1998 to 2000, he served as the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, among, I think, 3 decades of service to our country, right, Steve? So thank you for that service at the Department of State. All right, here's our game, 60 to 90 seconds. I actually told Larry 90 seconds, everybody. I told everybody else 60.
Larry gets 90?
I got confused. I lost my voice last night. I was dancing to a lot of bad music from the 1980s. All right, here's what we're going to do. First question. What's the one thing alumni, Americans, citizens of the world should know about your topic that we are currently not discussing enough or not getting right in the media discussion about it. And this is a very learned audience, so we don't have to rehearse the conventional things that everybody should know, but the one thing that you think more people should know more of about your topic at hand. Marshall, let's start with you.
I'm going to waste 15 seconds of my time by starting and thanking Mike McFaul for his leadership at FSI. The reason I'm doing this is he terms out this December. So after 11 years of fearless leadership, basically he's been president, he's been my president my whole career here at Stanford as faculty. Massive shoes to fill, and he's just been an incredible and fearless leader for us. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Marshall. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I think he gets his time back, though.
Yeah, I get that doesn't count against my
not
notes.
against your time. Not against your time.
Okay, I'm going to talk about climate change. What are we getting wrong about climate change? These are classes without quizzes, but I'm going to do a quick quiz, and I'm going to need your help. You're not going to be graded, but I'm going to see whether or not we're getting key facts about climate change wrong or right. Okay, so question number one, it's going to be two-question quiz. Question number one, CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in the US, are they going up or down? So raise your hand if you think they're going up. Okay, raise your hand if you think they're going down. Okay, some of you didn't vote. If you don't vote, you also get it wrong. You guys haven't taken a quiz in a while, so you have to vote. They peaked 20 years ago. They've been falling since 2007, so they're steadily going down. That is a success story that I think is underappreciated. Okay, Chinese emissions, right? China's in the news a lot, largest CO2 emitter. So again, in terms of the trend, are Chinese emissions going up or down? So up, okay, down. It's a bit of a trick question. They probably peaked this year. So it looks like in 2025, they'll fall for the first time in recorded history in China, right? So two big and underappreciated success stories. Okay, does that mean we've solved climate change? No. To stop climate change, we have to get emissions down to zero. So climate change does not stop until we get emissions to zero. Right now, we're at 50 billion tons of CO2 per year. We got to get that number down to zero. But in most of the major economies around the world, that trend has been downward for decades. And in some of the largest emitters, it is newly downward. And that is progress we should celebrate.
Terrific, Marshall. Thank you. Colin.
Hi, everybody.
Marshall set a very perfect bar there, didn't he? That was really beautiful.
He did. By the way, I am very proud to be a Stanford faculty member. I grew up in the Bay Area. I am not a Stanford alum. I was rejected from Stanford both times, both as an undergraduate and a graduate student. I didn't even get into Cal. But last laughs on Stanford because they gave me tenure. All right. Okay. So what's the one thing that alumni and Americans don't understand about artificial intelligence? I would just say that the so-called AI race between the United States and China will define the rest of our lives. It will define your children's lives, your grandchildren's lives. It'll affect our economic prosperity. It'll affect our national security. And because we all live our lives mediated through digital environments, it'll affect our way of life. I think the one thing that people get wrong is they tend to frame the AI race in terms of the race to the frontier. That is the race to the most advanced AI systems, in particular this ambition that so many companies in Silicon Valley have to achieve artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence. Think of models that are smarter than the smartest humans at all relevant cognitive tasks. Okay? That is how people judge, and people judge whether the United States or China is ahead on that score. I would argue, though, that the AI race is not actually properly understood as a single race to the frontier, that there is also a race for the adoption of AI systems into our government apparatus, in particular in our national security agencies and our militaries. There's a race to diffuse AI across the economy, potentially unlocking huge productivity gains while taking steps to make our economies and labor forces more resilient to the inevitable shocks of replacing human intelligence with machine intelligence. There is a race to translate AI-enabled breakthroughs in science and technology into actual physical things. So think of this as the race to transform bits into atoms. And here, it'll be particularly important to see whether the United States or China is fastest in applying these to industrial capabilities. And here, China's way ahead because of the use of embodied AI in industrial and humanoid robotics. And then there's the race to diffuse the technology around the world and whether that technology stack will be predominantly an American stack. That means models, chips, data centers, and digital infrastructure, or whether it will be a made in China stack. The only thing I would say on the scorecard here is that the United States leads at the frontier of research, but the lead is measured in months, it's not measured in years. And we also lead in computing power, but China will eventually catch up in that as well. Meanwhile, China leads in adoption, significantly leads in applications of AI in industrial contexts, especially robotics. Half the world's robots are in China, and that proportion is going to go up. And the two countries are in a fierce competition for diffusion around the world, with the United States relying on market forces and China relying on non-market forces, the US relying on the best models and the best tech, and China relying on good enough tech that's available to a lot bigger swath of the world. Bottom line that Americans don't fully appreciate, the United States could win the race to the AI frontier and lose the race to China on AI.
Thank you for that, I guess. Yeah, right. You hear the moans there?
Sorry, I'm sorry. I have two little children. I'm going to take two little children. There are two truths that my children will. One is they will never be smarter than AI for the rest of their lives, so they have to adjust to that. And second, this is not the hottest year of their life. This is the coldest year for the rest of their lives.
Cheer us up, Laurie.
Sorry, I wanted to bring us even. I want to go down. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to kick off my comment with a word of gratitude. I'm Israeli, and this is a very emotional week for me. 20 of my brothers and sisters returned home this week. We weren't sure this was going to happen. And this happened particularly and specifically thanks to the leadership of this country. So I'm utterly grateful, and most of my compatriots are utterly grateful, and it's just a very emotional week, so thank you for that. So I was asked to talk about nuclear weapons in the Middle East, and I'm going to tie it to the extraordinary developments this week in the Middle East and in Israel, Gaza. So what does the world or Stanford graduates, what are we getting wrong, or what do we don't know? And I think what's important to understand is that the whole issue of Iran's nuclear weapons and the June war in US and Israel, and it's usually put in place of the context of Israel's attempts to make sure that other hostile nuclear actors in the region don't develop nuclear weapons. And whenever we read stories in the paper, the newspapers would remind us that Israel did it in Syria in 2007 and in Iraq in 81. But for me, what's important as a scholar of security studies of the Middle East, is to place it in context. And this current war, the Israel-Gaza war, the October 7th war, is in fact a regional war. And Iran was involved in it, we now know, in the planning phase and in the funding phase. And I'm basing myself based on documents captured in Gaza and elsewhere that we're now analyzing, and they're available online. And I think this is something that's missing from the discussion. The June Iran war, or the attempt to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, isn't disconnected from its influence, its path, and what's happening in the Middle East now. And what the new documents show and tell us is that this was actually an operational plan that Hamas under Sinwar hatched in very close collaboration with Hezbollah in Lebanon and with the Iranians, and they had close guidance, they had funding. And I think what people don't know, and we actually have the operational plans, is that this was a plan to dismantle Israel. This wasn't a plan to put on the table the two-state solution, which I fully support, and we'll talk about it in the last bit of our question here, and is the only way forward. This was a plan to dismantle the state, and whenever we talk about nuclear weapons in the Middle East or the Iranian nuclear program, we have to remember that death to Israel, death to the US, at least the first part, was an operational plan, wasn't a slogan. We have to put it in context.
Excellent. Thank you, Ari. Larry.
When Kamala Harris's father, Donald Harris, was teaching economics here when I was an undergraduate, he had a kind of phrase that he would refer to. It became iconic and a subject of humor as well, called the totality of the total. He was a Marxist. I'm not going to get into that part of it. But I'd say the one thing that people aren't appreciating, Mike, but I have a hunch Mike more appreciate after reading your new book, is the totality of the total of what we're facing now in terms of the authoritarian onslaught on democracy and the diverse sources of effort to make the world safe for autocracy and to extinguish democracy as a system that has value, appeal, attraction, and momentum in the world. There is an emerging axis, I think, of autocracies. They have, diverse interests and not a great deal that unites them, but the worst of them, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, they do interact and exchange, and you see all sorts of authoritarian alliances, including in the effort to save embattled, deeply authoritarian and rights-violating regimes like the one in Venezuela. And so the most important thing that I would want to stress is that we're in a battle of values and ideas. I have a hunch this also emerges in your book. And we've been losing the battle of global narratives of late to a Chinese propaganda machine and a Russian propaganda machine and the massive, increasingly, I suspect, AI-driven and accelerated social media disinformation weaponry to sully and disillusion the idea of democracy. And we've lost our self-confidence, we've lost our belief in our own values, and we're failing to educate our young people, not only here, but in almost every democracy of the world, about why democracy is a better system, why freedom matters, why the road to autocracy doesn't stop at a certain point, but ends in the way that it has the perversity of Russia or Venezuela or Zimbabwe or so many other cases, Turkey, that we can point to. So we need to, we'll get into the policy dimension, but the most important thing I'd want to say is it's game on in terms of a global struggle, not just of systems, but of values and ideas. And we need to wage that struggle with conviction, resources, ingenuity, in a way that we aren't doing now.
Thanks, Larry. Steve.
Okay, this will not be news to Mike, but I think it'll be news to someone in the audience. And that is, unfortunately, the Russia-Ukraine war is likely to go on for some time, but the narrative that the Russian victory inevitable is not correct. Russia today occupies about 19% of Ukraine's territory. That's 1/3 less than the Russians occupied in spring of 2022. And to occupy that territory, the Russians have paid a horrific cost. Well over 1 million Russian soldiers killed or wounded in action in Ukraine. And just for some perspective, in January of 2022, on the eve of the major invasion, the number of Russians in the active duty forces of the entire military, not just the army, the entire military, was 1.1 million. For that cost, the Russians are really, they have not acquired what they wanted to achieve. Now, I'm not saying that the Ukrainians are winning. They face some very difficult problems, but they have some advantages. One, they are motivated in a way, they're defending their homeland, that the Russians are not. Two, they're fighting this war largely on the defensive, from prepared positions, often against Russians out in the open, and that gives them advantages. Three, in a way, they win, since they're fighting on the defensive, by not losing. Four, they've shown some incredible innovation. Ukraine today, with the war going on, produces well over 100,000 drones per month. Those are responsible for about 80% of the Russian casualties. When I was in Kyiv in May, my last time there, I had a chance to visit where they train Ukrainian drone operaters. And
Run by a former Stanford student, right?
Stanford class of 2024, a
Yes.
Ukrainian American who's now been there basically helping to coordinate the Ukrainian efforts to perfect the drone warfare. But the last thing is, you've seen it particularly in the last 3 months, is increasingly the Ukrainians have the capability to bring this war home to Russia. Since the beginning, Vladimir Putin has defined this as a special military operation. If you call it a war in Russia, you can go to jail. And he's tried to tell the Russian public, it's a limited war, it's not going to affect you. Well, in the last 3 months, the Ukrainians have attacked and incapacitated about 30% of Russia's oil refining capacities. Russians now sitting in gasoline lines at gas stations, including in Moscow, understand that the war is beginning to affect them. So the final point would be, do not underestimate the Ukrainians.
Great. Okay, I got 2 more questions and we're going to open it up, so we're going to be punchy. Second question. If you got 3 minutes with the President of the United States, and Colin, we'll start with you and go this way this time. What is you guys call it the bluff, bottom line up front, right? That's a Pentagon acronym I learned when I was in the government. What would be the one thing you would try to convince him to change in terms of policy of the United States of America? One thing.
I'm going to stick to the AI piece of that.
Okay, all right.
Because there are so many things. Look, I said a minute ago that the United States and China are in a multidimensional race. We need to treat it as if it is a multidimensional race. I think that basically the Trump administration is doing a lot of things to unleash innovation on the AI front. They're focused on deregulation. They're supportive of huge capital influxes into building very large data centers, fueled by enormous amounts of energy. I mean, the intersection between the issues I'm talking about and Marshall are enormous. When you hear companies like OpenAI talking about building data centers that will consume 5 gigawatts of power, that is the power of the city of Los Angeles, the second largest city in the United States. So, they're doing a lot to try to unleash this innovation engine. They're not doing nearly enough, in my view, to get Americans ready for the effect that AI is going to have on our democracy, on our labor force, and they don't have a strategy for diffusion around the world other than just unleash the market. And as I said, China doesn't have that mentality, so they're willing to make investments in places where we don't, and we're kind of dismantling our development infrastructure. I did talk about the fact that there were all these races that the United States is trying to position itself to win with China. But the other thing I tell the president is that there's one other race, and it's the race to avoid, and that's the race to the bottom. So during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were able to cooperate, even at the height of the Cold War, to reduce nuclear risk. They did it through the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty at the end of the 1960s. They did it with arms control agreements on strategic arms starting in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And the United States and China have to have an adult conversation around the risks of artificial intelligence that both countries face. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. These models are going to provide enormous amounts of technical uplift to non-state actors, think terrorists, in fields like cyber and biosecurity, which could threaten our critical infrastructure. It could threaten millions of lives with design pathogens. That's not something the United States has an interest in, and neither does China. And lastly, neither the United States nor China has an interest in us developing artificial general intelligence or superintelligence that is not aligned with human values or human interests and is not controllable by human beings. We may not be able to agree on whose interests and whose values they should be aligned with, to Larry's point, but we should agree that humans should be in control of our own fate. So even at this time of intense competition with China, we have to have a mature adult conversation about the shared risks that these technologies pose.
Excellent. All right. One idea. And remember, our president doesn't have a long attention span, so it's got to be. Yeah. I shouldn't have said that. I would like to withdraw that comment. I've never briefed him. I don't know that. That's what we have people here that work with him in the past administration. That's what they say. One idea.
So surprisingly, Israel, at least this week, is probably the only place on earth where Trump is very much admired and loved, actually in the political left.
Yes.
And criticized by the political right. So it's a bit of a reverse mirror or mirror kind of a situation. So if I had 1 minute and I only needed to, and I'm asked to focus on the one thing, I would tell him, be very wary of supporting the Qataris, the Turks, and the regimes that identify with a more radical Muslim Brotherhood branch of influence in the Middle East. They may seem like your friends, but we know this from history. We know this from the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and US backing of the Mujahideen. We know that this is what happened when the Israelis supported the groups that would eventually become Hamas in the Gaza Strip in the 80s. It's always a very bad idea to align yourself with the forces that at the bottom line support the more jihadi version of things in the Middle East and elsewhere. And it's a good idea to support the other guys, the Saudis, the Emiratis, etc.
That's a great point. Thank you. Yeah. Larry, you get 1 minute with President Trump.
No, I'm not going to take that bait, Mike, because there's no point in trying to make this case to a president who's trying to dismantle the very values and institutions that we need to promote around the world. So I'll direct my suggestion to the United States Congress, and I'll suggest that we go full in again on trying to rebuild the architecture of promoting democratic values, information, and institutions. I think we should revive the U.S. Agency for International Development in a new form. It had a lot of problems. We should continue to fund the National Endowment for Democracy. And as our outgoing from the Obama administration, distinguished military career officer, James Clapper, proposed in his book, Facts and Fears, we should and I know this resonates with you, we should recreate the U.S. Information Agency, to quote him, on steroids, so that we can re-engage this battle for information, truthful information, and democratic values, narratives, and ideas in the kind of energetic, principled, and resourceful way that we need right now.
Steve, and if you don't want to brief the president, you can go to the Congress or President Zelensky.
No.
Larry's now opened the aperture, but you get 1 minute to change policy in the world. What would you?
Why not? I'll take my shot at the president.
Okay.
Maybe, Mr. President, you have a real opportunity to mediate an end to this war, but you have to get serious and you have to stop letting Vladimir Putin string you along. Right now, Putin thinks he can achieve his goals on the battlefield. Trump has to help disabuse him of that notion to persuade Putin that he's going to fail on the battlefield, and if he continues to try, the economic, political, military costs are only going to grow. And he can do that. He has lots of leverage that he's not yet used. He can tighten sanctions on Russia. He can prioritize arms shipments through what the Ukrainians need, and he can work with the Europeans to move to use frozen Russian central bank assets. There's a European plan now basically to take about $160 billion and put that to Ukraine. That would give the Ukrainians the funds they need to buy the arms they need for 3 years. That would then confront Putin with the prospect that he's going to have 3 more years of grinding warfare, not much gain, but losing 300,000 to 400,000 people a year. That has a chance of really changing Putin's perspective. But to do that, Trump has to get serious. He has to adopt a very different approach from what we've seen over the past 8 months.
Terrific. Thanks, Steve. Marshall.
Probably a lost cause, but I'll take a swing at the president too, in terms of advice. Bad joke. So this administration and Trump one, I think it's very safe to say we're the most anti-environment administrations, at least in the last 60 years, maybe longer. So it's a very challenging time for environmental policy of any sort. When we say the words environmental policy, we shouldn't think about mostly policy protecting the environment. We should think about policy that protects us from things in the environment: dirty air, dirty water, a changing climate. So when we dismantle these policies, we hurt ourselves. That's clear. That's not my message. The way they've dismantled things, so just this week, Trump canceled the largest solar project ever to be built, or that was planned to be built in the US. What was that going to do? It was going to power the data centers of the kind that Colin talked about, right? Solar is now the cheapest form of energy that humanity has ever created. It is cheaper than all other sources of energy. It's sometimes half as expensive as natural gas in the US to power things with solar. So it's an incredibly cheap and effective technology. We can store that energy in batteries, which has gotten cheaper. So when we cancel these plants, we are burning piles of money, right? We are just literally flushing money down the toilet, pick your metaphor, right? So my message to Trump would be, you're a markets guy, let markets do their thing, right? Just get out of the way. Let's not burn piles of money. Let's let energy markets do their thing. And if they do so, then they're going to build more solar and probably more wind. And that's going to allow us to power the AI centers of the future and to give everyone in the US reliable energy, which they often don't have right now. So get out of the way.
That's great. Okay, last question, then we're going to open it up. And at my talk yesterday about my book, I'm not going to advertise it again, but you know how to buy it. Somebody rightfully said in the audience, what can we do, right? So we're talking about big things. We're talking about how we would advise the president. But what can Stanford do better to tackle these issues? And so that's the last question. Think about, Ari, we're going to start with you, and then we'll end with Colin. Let's say there's somebody out there that wants to give a $10 million gift to FSI. And if you're there, please talk to me afterwards. Or $100 million. I shouldn't lowball. Or actually just wants to be part of our community and has some intellectual capital that they want to interact with us about what's going on in the world. What is missing that we're not doing, either at FSI or Stanford as a whole, that if you had some resources and the ear of the president, that we should be doing more of it here at Stanford?
So I'm a part of the Israel Studies program as a fellow here, and I think the program is doing a terrific job. And thank you, Larry, for hosting me.
Yes.
And I would like.
And that's brand new, and that just happened in the last couple of years. And two of the leaders are on stage with us here today.
And I think people should know this. Stanford has a relatively thin footprint when it comes to studying the Middle East on all its aspects. So I think it would be terrific to expand that footprint. In politics, in studying the geography, the history, I study security issues in the Middle East, which apparently isn't an issue that's going away anytime soon. And I think it would be good to situate it in the context of the emerging challenges that we're now facing, because we need to generate the new generation of thinkers and people that would be able to implement the policy and to educate. And of course, it ties with all the challenges that we heard today, right? The Middle East is going to be heavily impacted by global warming. AI is a field where the Middle East is currently a battlefield. Israel has been under a continuous cyber attack for 2 years, and I'm sure other actors are well, not to mention democratic backsliding. So we need to be on top of it, and that's what I would recommend investing in.
Excellent. Larry?
Well, first I'll say that outside of teaching Stanford students, the most meaningful thing for me that I do each year at Stanford, and I've heard you make a similar remark, Mike, is engage and speak to and learn from our 30 summer fellows each year at CDDRL who come from all over the world. And this proposition was put out, and a member of the Stanford Board of Trustees, Sako Fisher, and her husband Bill stepped up to endow the program. And I just want to say I'll be eternally grateful to them for doing so. The next frontier for me is given at Stanford, given the state of the world now and the full-on assault on civil society and freedom, we're getting a growing number of Democrats at risk who really need at least a temporary home. I'm struggling every year to find a way to support a number of them from China, for example. And so there is a program called Democrats at Risk or Scholars at Risk that we engage. But I think for me, an exciting, very specific opportunity would be to create a fund for us to better support Democrats at Risk, both intellectuals and democracy practitioners from around the world.
Great, very concrete. Steve?
Well, I think it's things we're doing, we ought to do more of them. So one is speaking, writing, doing media on the Russia-Ukraine work. Mike does a lot of it, I do a lot of it, a lot of other people at FSI are involved in this. And it's just not just talking about the war, but talking about the war's impact on the United States. I think the view in the White House is Ukraine's 5,000 miles away, it doesn't matter. But every other American president for nearly 7 decades has said a stable and secure Europe is a vital American national security interest. If Russia wins in Ukraine, it's going to be a less stable, less secure Europe, and it's going to be a more threatening Russia. And it would be, I think, a poor bet to think that Vladimir Putin's ambitions end just with Ukraine. Second, there's some technical things we do. Mike co-chairs a group I've participated for 3 years. It's the International Working Group on Russian Sanctions. And over the last 3+ years, we've produced, I think, about 24 working papers.
23 to be exact,
Okay,
Steve.
about
Yeah.
23 working papers.
Because I've edited them all, so I know, yeah.
But that talk about how the West could tighten economic sanctions on Russia or apply new sanctions in a way that would hopefully increase the economic pressure on Russia, again, focused at trying to get the Kremlin to change its course. And then the last thing is outreach to U.S. government. Have to say it was a lot easier in the previous administration. I think we all had contacts with people there, and while our ideas were not always taken, at least there was a discussion. It's a real challenge with this administration. I don't think we've actually figured out how to communicate ideas. My own view is that we're probably not going to have the kind of input opportunities that we had in the Biden administration. So maybe it really is public and kind of this idea, which I think has the one chance of changing the president's approach, which is to make clear that the way he's behaving now, it really does look like he's being played by Putin and he looks weak. That might trigger a reaction that could get a more effective American policy.
Excellent. Marshall.
Great. 3 things. Number one, Stanford has long been a hotbed of clean tech innovation. We should continue to lean into that. I'm proud of the work the Doerr School, where my other half of my appointment is doing that. We need to fully lean into that. The reason we've had the progress we have had on emissions is because the technologies have just made it a lot cheaper to adopt these to adopt them. And so the better we can do on that, the easier our job is in convincing people we should be doing it, number one. Number two, federal policy is a mess right now on climate. We need to lean into policy elsewhere in the world. Thanks to Mike, we were able to hire the very best economists studying environmental issues in China, right? China is a hotbed of clean tech innovation as well. This is where a lot of the world's action is happening in terms of clean technology relevant for the energy transition, and so we need people focused on that. And again, thanks to Mike, we have literally one of the best people in the world. Number 3, Stanford is what it is because we are able to attract the best students, undergraduates, graduate students, faculty, postdocs from around the world. The administration is increasingly, not our administration, the federal administration is making it harder for us to do that. We need to not lose courage and need to make sure we can still attract the best and brightest from around the world and really lean into that.
Paula.
All right, let me say one thing about research and one thing about teaching. So on the research side, there's no question that Stanford is ground zero in the world for technical research on artificial intelligence. I do not personally believe that Stanford punches at its weight on questions of how AI will impact the world. Geopolitical competition, I've talked about the United States and China, the national security implications of artificial intelligence, the implications of AI for global democracy and prosperity. These are all areas where I think FSI should be a leader, working alongside places like the Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, HI, and the Hoover Institution, but FSI should be doing more of this, and I will be a champion of that. The second thing is how we teach our students to learn and work in an AI future. We have a choice. It's a choice. Human labor and intelligence can be automated and replaced by artificial intelligence, or we can be enhanced and augmented by artificial intelligence. That's a choice. That's a human choice. We need to urgently redesign our curricula here at Stanford to provide our students with the knowledge and skills they will need to team with and be augmented by AI instead of being replaced by these machines. Think about it this way. The normal scientific enterprise, whether it's social science or hard sciences, has 3 steps. 1, you come up with the problems, puzzles, and hypotheses that you want to test. 2, you conduct research, experiments, you do those tests. And then 3, you assess the results, including their implications for society. That's what we do. That's what normal science is. We need to educate our students at Stanford so that they continue to lean in to the human strengths along that 3-step process. That means the human strengths of coming up with the problems and puzzles that need to be addressed. And that means applying human expertise and judgment, as well as political, moral, and ethical judgment to evaluate the answers, even as they increasingly team with artificial intelligence in that middle piece of doing research conducting experiments, testing our ideas. I said my kids are never going to be smarter than AI for the rest of their lives. That's true. My daughter is a freshman in high school. My son is a fifth grader. But my kids don't need to be smarter than AI. The future where they will thrive is a world in which my kids plus AI are smarter than any machine by itself. And that world is possible, and Stanford can make that world possible.
Great. So that was pretty remarkable. We have, well, actually, I want to add, can I just say one thing on this same topic? So this is one of my favorite weekends here at Stanford, by the way, when you all come back. My students, I've been teaching here for 30 years. I started in 1995 in political science. And students come back. I just had office hours yesterday with all of my students coming back. And many of my students are working on national security issues. And it's such it's so fulfilling to see people, come back after 10, 20, 25 years. And they're the people, they're the students that are interested in this intersection between research and policy, and they come and they work with all of us, right? That's what we have. In fact, one of those students is celebrating his 5th reunion, and I just bumped into him at FSI yesterday. He's a student working on China. He's working on what Colin was talking about, China and AI competition, and he came back to see his professor for his honors thesis, Professor Larry Diamond. That student is my son, Cole McFaul. So my plea is, we are all, I hope you got a flavor of it, we're all interested, we all do serious research, but we're also looking for the policy implications of it, because I hate to sound so banal, but we want to make the world a better place. That's what FSI is all about. It's a unique institution at that intersection, teaching, research, policy. I don't think there's a place on the planet like it. And my plea would just that we had more professors like the ones that you just heard on this stage today, because this is really an all-star cast. And with that, we're going to open it up. People have microphones. I can't see very well in the dark, so people with microphones, just find somebody and then stand up and ask your question. In the back, right there, yeah, at the top of the stairs.
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you. My question is, how do you view the potential for grassroots efforts like No Kings Rally to move the needle, and what else could be done similar to that?
Larry, that sounds like a question for you. But anybody else can jump in too.
I spoke there last year, or last spring. I would be there today if I wasn't preoccupied with reunion. I frankly think that visible expressions of protest around democratic values and principles are extremely important to the defense of democracy. But it's also, I can tell you, just absolutely vital that they remain nonviolent and respectful of the law. And attacking ICE agents or obstructing the lawful work of government, it's a losing proposition, however else you evaluate it. And in the end, I just want to say you can carry this lesson wherever you want in practical terms, but as valuable as civic protest is, as valuable as coalitions of principled pushback against illegal and unconstitutional initiatives are, I've watched the trajectory of authoritarian projects in many countries around the world, and the thing that brings them to a conclusion is almost always electoral alternation.
Great answer. Is there a microphone on this side or not? Then over here. Yeah, please, sir.
This is a sustainability question for Professor Burke. The U.S. is the only country in the world, I believe, that has 51 state public utility commissions that regulate electric power rates, plant siting, and so forth. And data centers require a lot of power, and by the way that electric rates are calculated, if they're connected to the power grid, the utility invests in being able to bring power to them or take power from them if they have some of their own generating capacity. That cost falls upon ordinary ratepayers living in an apartment house someplace far from the data center who are wondering why their electric bill suddenly doubled. And also, we might be the only country where the federal environmental regulator not only regulates that you must limit pollution when any plant of any kind is operating, but requires a very long process of permitting before the plant can even be built. Why not just simply regulate that the plant operates with good environmental stewardship and drop the permitting if the plant is going to operate cleanly? How do we square the circle on these things?
It's a great question. I'll just zoom out a bit. So energy affordability, huge problem. It's dominating. So I was just in Sacramento. State level politics where California is trying to lead on environmental issues, they are being completely hamstrung by exactly this issue. We pay so much for energy, electricity in California that this is going to limit their ability to do anything else. And so you're absolutely right that we have to solve this, and that permitting and various regulation is a huge impediment to that. So we have 50 years of regulation on top of regulation that has made it very hard to build energy infrastructure, among other things, in this country. And we're now recognizing that, and that this is a substantial impediment to everything we want to do in the clean energy transition. So I'm with you that this is a problem that needs to be solved. We need federal help on this. There's efforts in Congress that have so far repeatedly failed, but have some bipartisan support. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, just on this, because you mentioned the data center piece, I think this is an historic opportunity. The entire economy right now is being propped up by about 7 to 10 companies. They are almost all tech companies, and they're almost all rooted in these enormous, once-in-a-lifetime investments in infrastructure, all associated around artificial intelligence and data centers. And so you can either take that as an opportunity to fall behind, where we pay higher prices for our electricity, or we can create a virtuous cycle in which this enormous amount of capital, this enormous demand, the fact that it's propping up the entire U.S. economy becomes an incentive to reform our regulations, to streamline our, you talked about permitting, to modernize our grid, which is technically backwards in all the ways that one can imagine, and to make sure that the energy mix that's powering these data centers, whether it's on grid or behind the meter, is clean. That means, yes, solar and wind, but it also means nuclear, geothermal, and gas for sometimes when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining. But this is possible, but not if the federal government doesn't lean into it.
Great. I think I've been neglecting this side. Oh, right there. Okay.
So all the data centers and power infrastructure in the world are nothing to the AI race without the silicon that turns that power into inference and training. And TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, produces a lot of the chip supply. Could you give any book recommendations to understanding the broader Taiwan situation in especially in the context of the threat to chip supply?
Yeah, so for those who...
Colin and then Larry, yeah, because Larry wrote a book on that. So, but Colin, go first.
You're absolutely right. So the data centers are filled with the most sophisticated technologies in the world, the advanced semiconductors that are produced by companies like NVIDIA. Now, in reality, they are designed by NVIDIA. They are produced in Taiwan, 90% of them by TSMC, which you mentioned in your question. And so there are only a handful of companies here that matter the most, NVIDIA being one, ASML, which is a company in the Netherlands that produces the lithography equipment that's necessary for those chips to be produced, and TSMC. And so a lot is riding on whether there is a conflict between mainland China and the island of Taiwan, to include one that could pull the United States into a direct confrontation with China. Any conflict over Taiwan would destroy the global economy. It would make the impact of COVID or the Russia-Ukraine war seem like a blip compared to what it would do to supply chains and the global economy. In terms of books to understand it, I think still the best book on understanding the history of this is Chris Miller's book Chip Wars, which I assume a lot of people have read. There's a new book by one of our colleagues, Oriana Mastro, called Upstart, which looks at China's military modernization and conflicts and tensions over Taiwan. And there are, but if you want kind of short, pithy things, I'd actually recommend going to the Foreign Affairs website and looking at their recent Taiwan articles that are actually quite good.
Colin has also published on these issues on foreign affairs. Larry, and I have one more book recommendation.
Going to strongly recommend Chris Miller's great book, Chip Wars, but if I can humbly add another to the list, we had a 2-year study based at the Hoover Institution on exactly these issues. And the collective report book that we produced is called Silicon Triangle, the United States, Taiwan, China, and Global Semiconductor Security. And the wonderful thing about it is if you just Google Silicon Triangle and Hoover Institution, you can download the thing for free if you don't want to order it or pay for it. If I can just add one other thing, when I took a class of Stanford undergraduates to Taiwan for 19 days this summer through Bing Overseas Studies, we visited the industry, and then we saw an amazing film produced in Taiwan about the history of the industry called, in English, it's in English subtitles, A Chip Odyssey. And we are actually going to show this film at the Hoover Institution on Wednesday night, November 5th, for free. We're even going to feed everyone who comes before the movie starts at about, 7 o'clock or something. So if you're in the area, and it's hard to explain how a film about the emergence, a documentary about the emergence of the chip industry in Taiwan could be actually a moving personal story, but it's a remarkable documentary. November 5th.
Great, Larry. And I want to plug one more book in the same spirit. It's called The Boiling Moat, Urgent Steps to Defend Taiwan, edited by our Hoover visiting scholar, Matt Pottinger, a former Trump administration official, just so we're clear that we're not partisan. It's a fantastic book. I cited a lot of my own book and a series of people, about a dozen, I think, Larry, different authors on it.
That was also commissioned by our project at the Hoover Institution.
I forgot about that. But we also have a Taiwan project at FSI. We have 2 Taiwan projects here at Stanford. And I think it's fair to say, Larry, you're the expert, I'm not, but we may be one of the leading universities in the country working on issues of Taiwan, on all dimensions of Taiwan, not just the security piece. All right, we're down to our last 2 minutes, which means we have time for one more question. I guess it's over here, and I hope it's a really good question.
I hope so too. There's among younger people, particularly in this country, in addition to a lot of protesting about the end of democracy, there's also a lot of pressure on the idea of a market economy. Do you see that as an inconsistency? Is freedom, is a market economy key to freedom in the world, or is democracy able to exist in a socialist environment?
Stole my question.
All right, so I'm a political science. Yeah. I have a doctorate in political science, which means I'm neither a real doctor nor a real scientist. But one of the most famous phrases in comparative politics from a scholar named Barrington Moore is "no bourgeoisie, no democracy." Historically, democracy does not survive when there isn't a vibrant middle class that's supported by things like property rights and a rule of law. So no, I think it's very difficult. Now, there could be versions of of things that Americans might think of as socialism that exist in Europe that are completely conducive with vibrant democracy. If you've ever spent time in Scandinavia, they're some of the happiest and freest places in the world, and they have like 70% taxes. So there's lots of versions of this. I will say one thing though, markets also have to stick up for democracy. And one of the things that's troubled me the most is, a lot has been made about efforts to, curtail certain aspects of freedom in the current moment. But, the administration is also asking for essentially rents from companies to do business. They're trying to undermine the independence of the Fed. And they're doing a lot of things that, frankly, will undermine the rule of law and the faith and confidence that people around the world have in the United States and the US dollar in ways that we will all pay an economic cost for in the long term, and markets and businesses are saying nothing. In fact, it's worse than nothing. They are bending the knee, one after another. So it's not just that we have to have markets for democracy, the markets have to stick up for democracy.
Larry, do you want to add something? Final word to you. This is a topic you've studied for most of your life.
Briefly, 2 points. I emphatically endorse everything Colin said. I think it was extremely well stated. I would just add that we're seeing some erosions in principles of market capitalism, which I think are very important to sustaining democracy. In this administration, with its forcing its way into co-ownership of companies that I think is unhealthy. The Wall Street Journal has actually had some excellent coverage and editorializing on this. And the second thing is, just as a scholar of democracy, I would distill a lot of research and argument. It's a kind of friendly addition to what Colin was saying, that the current levels and trends in terms of concentration of wealth and income are inconsistent with the preservation of a healthy capitalism and a healthy democracy. And we need to address that.
So yeah, I think it was Aristotle that first talked about that. And we have courses on that online. We have seminars on these subjects online. So I want to close by encouraging you to sign up to what FSI does. And I actually just want to end on another note. There's a lot in the press these days about how horrible universities are and how woke they are and how they're not doing this and they're not doing that. But I've been here. I came as a 17-year-old kid to Stanford in 1981. I joined the faculty in 1995. My kids were born here. They went to school here. I live on campus. I've had basketball and football tickets through the good times and the bad times. And I will be there tonight to watch us defeat Florida State or freeze with my son while we are defeated by Florida State. But my youngest son will never leave a football game early, even when we're losing like 60-2 to USC back in the dark days. But I just want to say, I live here. This is where I've been my whole life. And when I read this nonsense about what happens at universities, I just hope you felt for an hour what really happens at universities and what incredible faculty we have here at Stanford talking about the most vital issues for our country and the world. And I could not be more proud to be a member of this faculty and to be an alum of this fantastic university, Stanford University. Thank you very much. Thank you.